This eighth video is a really important one because it's talking about how to organize and write a history paper or project. To start, always choose a topic in which you're interested. If you don't have any idea or the professor doesn't provide a list of possibilities, peruse the freshman textbook or the internet for suggestions. Once you have a few possibilities, you need to find out what sources are available, both primary and secondary, which will be discussed in later videos. Both are necessary for a good term paper. Obviously, you'll need to know what others have concluded about your possible topic and where you might find something new. In any event, if you find that sources are very hard to get in distance, perhaps the possible topic is too narrow. Also, if sources are everywhere, it might suggest the possible topic is too broad and unmanageable for the paper. If the professor requires approval of a paper topic first, be sure not just to choose your topic out of thin air and without knowledge of the sources you'll use. You may later find that the topic doesn't work and you have to repeat the process, or perhaps worse, incur a penalty for the topic change. Of course, you got to select the paper topic with the individual professor's requirements in mind. For example, the number of pages in the paper, the extent over number of the sources, etc. Regardless, the paper will be graded as an example of the student's ability to research, organize, and defend a thesis, write well, and cite sources properly. If a student writes succinctly and has a narrow subject with few but hard to get sources, he or she might demonstrate skills in fewer pages and do well. If, on the other hand, a student is redundant and verbose and includes a lot of material that does not relate to the thesis, he or she may find that despite the length, their performance suffers. The point is to define a clear thesis and adequately defend it. Every history paper or project must have a central conclusion or argument. This is called the thesis. It is the major point of your paper, and the rest of the paper develops it. If someone reads your paper and they kind of say, "Huh? What's this about?" you know it isn't properly written. It needs to be a short summary of everything your paper is trying to prove. The thesis should be near the outset of your paper. Students cannot assume, however, that their readers know about their subject. If students state their thesis in the very first sentence, their readers might not understand the terms used or the people mentioned in that thesis statement. The first step, therefore, is to provide enough general background information for the readers to grasp fully the thesis. In short, a good history essay or paper has an introduction. Introduction begins quite generally, explaining the topic or the focus of the paper, working its way in just enough detail so that the readers can understand the thesis. Students should note that it is not good style to write, "This paper will explore," which can become a sort of a writing crutch and make the paper read like a science report. If the students introduce their topic clearly, the paper's focus and thesis are obvious, while the paper will flow more as a narrative. The length of the introduction depends upon the complexity of the topic. In a short essay or paper, the introduction may only be a paragraph or so, with the thesis statement usually at the end. In a complex monograph, the introduction may be an entire first chapter. Once again, the thesis statement itself clear at the end. A clear, concise thesis statement is vital because this informs the reader what the rest of the paper or book is about. In any event, by the end of the introduction, the reader should know what the paper's focus and topic is and what the author's thesis or conclusions about that topic are. The remainder of the paper simply presents the evidence supporting the thesis in an orderly fashion. Put another way, it draws from the student's research and presents the reasons the student's thesis is true, point by point, one supporting point just after another. The more points, the more evidence, and the stronger the thesis becomes. In a short essay or paper, each paragraph may constitute a separate supporting point. In a more complex monograph, each chapter may constitute a separate supporting point. In such a longer, complex work, each supporting point may constitute its own supporting thesis and be developed within the context of the overall work as such. Paragraph by paragraph, it builds an argument whose conclusions support the larger thesis of the book. And in this way, a good history book or paper is organized like an outline. It's easy to write a history paper if one has an outline in mind before placing fingers on keyboards. Likewise, once students understand that the outline of the history book, then it's easier to read the book. The student may know, for example, the book's central thesis is near the end of the introduction. He or she may know that the book knowing where to look for the central thesis makes researching secondary sources much easier in the first place. One hardly has to read the whole book to understand what it's saying and how the student can then utilize it in his or her own work. After you've provided all the evidence in all the subsequent paragraphs or chapters, it's important to go back and remind your reader of what the central thesis is, and you do this in a short conclusion. This is sort of the opposite of the introduction. You start narrowly and reiterate the thesis, reminding them of how you've arrived at it, and sort of concluding broadly and stating the significance of the paper. You sort of leave them wanting more. Obviously, this is your formal writing, and always use your best grammar. You can't rely on digital spell check or grammar checks. Always proofread your paper before turning it in to the professor. If you write something and you're hurried and then you quickly reread it, what you're going to interpret is what you meant to say and maybe not what's actually on the paper. And so put the paper aside for a while and come back to it with fresh eyes and then read it out loud word by word. You invariably catch some mistakes you've made. I've been doing this a long time, and you see the same sorts of grammatical and stylistic errors. Often it's misspellings, problems with capitalization, run-on sentences, improper tenses. People would especially use past perfect tense when they really just need past tense. There are unclear pronouns, ending sentences with preposition like in or at. There's split infinitives. There's even double negatives, and just an array of punctuation errors. So it's nothing wrong with having somebody look over your paper to check for grammatical errors, as long as it's your writing. They're not actually doing the writing. Writing style is important too. It's kind of like that Supreme Court justice who said, I can't define pornography, but I know when I see it. Well, it's hard to define style, good style, but you know it when you see it. The paper should read like a narrative. It should be smooth. And you do this with several things. You always vary your words. You watch transition between points. You don't want to list, even though you're writing from a thesis and developing it, you don't want to have each subpoint numbered. There's really no reason to have subsections. It all interrupts the narrative. You just want to rely on your words to create a smooth transition from one point to another and distinguish when one point ends and another one begins. So you vary your sentence structure. You have a lot of different clauses and your word choices, I say, and you try to avoid first person, which can be unclear. Always check for redundancy. If you use quotes, and now this will be mentioned in a later video, always introduce the speaker in the narrative itself. If it's the first time the narrative has mentioned the speaker, you want to identify him or her as well, who they are. And generally, professors will say don't skip lines between paragraphs and properly indent each paragraph. This is, again, formal writing, and you don't want to use slang or colloquial terms, and generally you don't want to use contractions either. Most professors would like some form of title to your paper, and you may want to select a topic that reflects not only the title that reflects not only the topic but the thesis. Some professors want a title page, others do not, but be sure to check first. Your paper is going to have citations, and we'll talk about citations in later videos, but they can come either as footnotes or endnotes. The professor may specify which, but they all need to be properly formatted. Most professors will also want a bibliography at the end, including all the sources used, organized alphabetically by both primary and secondary sources. All of this will be discussed in later videos. Now, individual professors may have different requirements, but if not otherwise noticed, most professors would have papers be double-spaced with standard 12-point font and with 1-inch margins. I get a lot of times papers with these huge fonts that are trying to fulfill some type of minimum page requirement, and professors are obviously not going to fall for that. You might want to number each page, and you might want to staple them together. Just be aware that some professors don't like binders. And don't forget to add your name to the first page or the title page. There'll be other videos getting into more detail on how to research and cite papers, but when you're working through your paper, you work from an outline and you get your evidence. And if you feel like you're being overwhelmed, the librarians can help you, and of course the professor can help you. We're here to help. Don't be shy about asking for it. But the key is not to put off this work until it's too late to have time to do it. So you want to start this term paper early, as will be mentioned in other videos. This then concludes a short little video on how to organize and write a history paper or project.